The thing with apocalypse, though, is that there's another side to it, right? As you know, since you've been with me through these lectures and you've read through the book of Revelation, you have the shining city on the one hand, but there's a whole other narrative that leads up to chapters 20, 21, and 22, right? And in those chapters, we have violence, plague, uh, warfare. We have the burning of the Whore of Babylon. We have the four horsemen as they're depicted here coming to wreak vengeance, right? God's justice and vengeance upon all of those who worship the beast. And so the dark side, I would say, of Revelation, and of if you're going to use that metaphor, right, of thinking of America as in shining New Jerusalem, is that what about all the other stuff, right? What about all the narrative that leads up to, sure, you have a wonderful, hopeful ending, right? But you can't just sweep everything else under the rug. And in fact, if you use that metaphor, it's very likely you're going to import that dark side of the analogy into your understanding as well. And this is what it says in Revelation 22. After this glorious description of refuge and the New Jerusalem, outside are the dogs and sorcerers and sexually immoral and murderers and idolaters and everyone who loves and practices falsehood. Some of this language might seem very familiar to you if we're thinking about immigration, right? So if you posit the United States as the New Jerusalem and having that identity, then you might also say those that belong outside, those that need to be kept outside are these people, right? Are dogs, sorcerers, sexually immoral, murderers, and idolaters. And you can think within our understanding and our debates are very heated and polemic and divided in extreme debates about immigration, who we call people that are like dogs, that are equated to being like animals, those who don't worship the same way as some people believe they should, right? And those who are being accused of being rapists, being sexually corrupting, or being violent, or those who are deceitful and criminal, right? Essentially criminal, understood in that way. And so I would say to have the United States be constantly equated to the city of God, the New Jerusalem, is a double-edged sword because it will also cut the other way. It can be used also to exclude and use that language, the violent language of exclusion in Revelation, as well as the shining New Jerusalem vocabulary. So in this way, Revelation, I would say, you can see this be at work throughout American history. So I'm going to give you an example, right? I'll walk you through what's happening at the end of the 19th century going into the 20th century. And this is with the beginning of immigration exclusion laws that are the first federally enforced systematic laws starting in 1875 and going into early 20th century, and actually are not repealed until after World War II and then finally reformed again in 1965. But some of this serves as the very basis and foundation of what is our legacy of immigration federal law in the United States. And I would say so much of it utilizes actually language and understanding from Revelation, strangely enough. So we have had waves of immigration exclusion, certainly before 1875. So we have discriminatory practices, social ostracization against the Irish, against Eastern Europeans, against Southern Europeans, and others. But what happens in the 1850s is that there is a vast need in the American West for cheap labor, especially to build the Transcontinental Railroad. And what happens is that immigrants leave China in order to work and bring money back. And so there's an influx of people who are not recognizable to white Americans as European of any extraction, right? And so this is a new flood of people who are coming, right? And actually, it's not a huge number, but it seems huge because they are taking the Transcontinental Railroad projects and coming into the West to work in the mines, right? There's the gold rush. There are also copper and silver mines in Nevada and other Western territories. And this begins to cause concern and a panic, especially in the US government. What happens is there begin to be debates on the Senate floor, debates against the railroad magnates like Leland Stanford and others who are building these roads and want the cheap labor to say, you are only doing this for financial gain, but what is this doing to our country, right? So there are definitely white nativist claims, right? By nativist, I mean people who believe that they are the ones who belong and have always belonged in the land, and it should only belong to a certain group of people, namely themselves, right? So you have white nativists who are arguing against this in Congress and using specific language to talk about the Chinese. And much of the language that they're using, right, is that of invasion. And they start using a language of invasion and enemy, and not just of enemy, but particularly of an evil enemy. And starting, this is called the Yellow Peril, and this is, you see this in literature at the time, to create this kind of fear amongst society, amongst to create this anti-immigration movement. And so you have this yellow danger, people being depicted in, semi-demonic ways and coming in an influx that's going to take over, right? And described particularly as idolatrous. So heathen Chinese becomes a regular way to label Chinese, and you understand the language, the vocabulary of those who are idolatrous. And then also here we have the warlord of darkness, right, being used in this demonic way to describe a people who are coming in, which makes sense if you're following the logic of Revelation to think of your own nation, right? To say, if we're God's country and we're going to define ourselves as chosen and draw that upon racial lines and draw that upon lines of how we worship and describe people, then this is a very easy political way to create political movement against these people, to use this particular language. And indeed, the literature and the debates are being used in that particular way. Even using cultural symbols against the Chinese. So for example, in the center of China via Japan, that pink book cover that you see here, you see the flag and what looks like a dragon, right? And the Qing dynasty at the time, which was ruling China, had the dragon as part of its flag, and that is weaponized and employed in American literature against the Chinese to talk about a demonic presence, right? That this is a worship of Satan, and so therefore they can never become citizens. They can never be assimilated into a Christian nation such as ourselves. And in fact, this is not different, right, than the rules of entry for the New Jerusalem, in which who can enter, right? Only those who are practicing correct worship. We see the letter to the seven churches, you need to do and obey in these particular ways. And anyone who worships the beast, understood as the dragon, right, cannot enter. So you have almost exactly parallel that right of entry defined in these particular ways.